You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, everybody, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. And as I'm speaking right now, I'm pulling up my notes for what I had to say. It was another really fantastic episode of this show. I mean, it's really amazing to me how they've been able to actually keep the quality like really high. I mean, you know, because usually in these types of shows, especially the animated ones where they tend to go on several episodes, right? I'm not talking about like the live action shows where they're only like 6 to 8 episodes. Usually the animated shows could be anywhere from like 14, 16, 22 or whatever. And it's really difficult for them to actually maintain the type of quality, you know, that you're used to seeing. But it amazes me how good this season actually is. Just they've really set the bar high, and they're just maintaining this high level straight through. Like, there's been no little dips or anything on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, the quality of the show, the writing, everything has been done phenomenally on this particular season of The Bad Batch. And we've often said that there's been no fillers. You know, every episode has really moved and progressed the story. And so I think that's really aided in that aspect of being such a rock solid season, because now, you know that each week, you know, you're like, okay, they're about to do a filler episode. Like, okay, the first, because I could usually tell, like, okay, we have like a 3 episodes. Like, okay, the 4th one is about to be filler,
Right?
Like, and it usually,
Exactly.
you know, like I'm like literally counting the episodes. Like, all right, out of how many you know, episodes we have for this season? Oh, it's 12. Okay, we're probably going to at least get 2 to 3 fillers, you know, and then it's just you can kind of see when the fillers are coming. It's like, oh, yep. Filler episode next week, you know. So,
right.
But this one hasn't been that way at all.
No, and that's what's amazing, because I every week I've been doing the same thing. I'm like, all right, well, this next one's got to be. I mean, it's got to be a filler episode. But as Ted Adam Green basically says, only 2 more Bad Batch episodes to go, guys. And yeah, I mean, we're pretty much at the end now. You know, it's funny because the whole time we were saying, all right, well, you know, it started out pretty strong or whatever, and then you would think that you would get those inevitable dips or whatever, and we haven't gotten them. And here we are.
Is it the last one was a filler?
Yeah, right, the season finale. Well, and what show was that? There was, maybe it's a Mandalorian. I don't know. There was one of the shows was like really good, and then the season finale was just kind of like, you know,
Book of Boba Fett.
Well, the Book of Boba Fett, though, had a lot of issues. I mean, I remember the show that I'm talking about was actually fairly strong throughout the whole thing. And then it was like the season finale, even though we have like the Book of Boba Fett, Mandalorian season 3, there have been a lot of season finales that we've just been like, really? But, you know, I mean, so it would be hilarious if, especially this, right? It just maintains a super high level of, you know, quality, and we're talking about how great the writing is and all this other stuff, and then
man, talk about an ultimate letdown, man.
Well, it would be even more of a letdown because this is a series finale for this too.
Exactly.
You know, they don't get another shot to make up for it unless he pulls a Clone Wars thing where like 3 years later we get a season 4, you know?
Right.
And I mean, it should be mentioned. First of all, I want to thank everybody too, because if anybody's watching us live right now, I know Ted's watching us live right now, but if anybody else is actually watching the live show, I commend you for actually following when we're going live lately, because I know we've been very much deviating from our normal Monday. Well, the Monday show actually has been fairly stable, but the Friday show has been just moving all over the place. So for those of you who are joining us live, thank you, you know, for taking your time and following us. And then again, a lot of people are actually watching the rebroadcast, so you know that's cool. I'm trying to think if there's any other housekeeping things I want to do before we get into this episode. Oh, well, I am going to put a poll up later because the second Rebel Moon movie has come out on Netflix. And we did review the first one. We reviewed the first one because it was supposed to be a Star Wars project. Lucasfilm turned down Zack Snyder's pitch. And so then he just created Rebel Moon as like an alternate thing. Like, well, I still want to make this thing, right? So we did the first one. However, this thing's supposed to be like, I think 2 or 3 or 4 movies or something like that. I think it's a trilogy. I mean, if it started out to be Star Wars, it probably was a trilogy. But I'm going to put a poll up to see if you guys then now want us to review the second film. Because we did the first one, like I said, because it was a Star Wars thing, so it's kind of like, well, okay, we more or less got that out of the way. But if you guys want us to review whichever ones come out, like the second one, because it was just released Friday, then, we'll do that. If not, then we'll skip it. We'll leave it up to you guys in the polls. But other than that, yeah, we're 2 episodes now away from the season and series finale of The Bad Batch. And that's probably going to roll right into Tales of the Empire, to be honest. Mm-hmm. That's coming out May the 4th. So, I think our Monday shows, or no, I'm sorry, not our Monday shows. Our Friday shows are going to be taken care of for a while. But we do have some things in the pipeline for the Monday shows, too. So you guys are going to want to check those out. All right, so getting into this thing, once again, I really have to say that something that you see in these episodes that is consistent is their opening scenes are usually very strong, and to me this was no exception. You had the scene of, they're marching through with that droid with the troopers, and it kind of had a New Hope vibes to me, actually, but it was very sinister. And that's one of the things that you pointed out in several of these reviews, is that the Empire is really threatening. They're really sinister. They're a little bit dark. I mean, it's not the typical thing that we're used to, and I have to say that, I mean, once again, the opening scene is just setting the bar right there. Like, nope, we're still going to be good.
Yeah, I mean, the opening scenes are done very well. We see that, like you said, the droid coming in, and you see Omega kind of her little bunk or what have you, and it's very humdrum. It's you feel the I guess almost like the monotony of just being there. I think that's kind of where you're expecting. It's like, okay, just another day, take my vitals. Okay. But then of course Omega starts asking questions like, okay, and she's paying attention to things. She's watching, and now we're seeing more of her training coming in. This the fact that she's more observant. She's um she's reading the room a little bit better than he has in the past. And I thought I think that's great, seeing her growth as a character.
Well, yeah, and actually this is something that initially I was going to point out later. At least it came in later in my notes. But one of the things that I observed, since we're talking about Omega's character, is the fact that the difference between her character in, say, seasons 1 and even 2 versus now really reminds me of the same like overall poise and everything that Ahsoka had in Rebels versus the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
There's that same kind of a growth thing happening where, yes, it's a very different Omega that we've been getting lately, right? She's trained. She's starting to approach things differently. And, something that another review, I was watching a couple of reviews of this episode or reading them like I usually do, because sometimes after doing it, I like to see, well, is there anything that I miss and maybe another YouTuber or some other website or whatever writing about it maybe brought up. And that is that Omega is really, in the normal environment that she's in, she's like the little sister. Well, now she's the older sister with these other kids.
It's true.
So it's sort of like a role reversal in a way. So when you factor in the fact that she's actually grown a lot, much the same way, like I said, that Ahsoka did between Clone Wars and Rebels, where in Rebels you get a much different, like a totally different Ahsoka. I mean, she's still the same character, but there's obviously growth, there's obviously maturity, there's obviously wisdom, experience, and all that stuff. And I think that's what you're seeing primarily in this episode with Omega.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I never really thought about that, but that's very true because you're Omega usually has the advantage or the crutch of the rest of the Bad Batch
Hmm.
around her to she knows like, okay, they're going to show up and they're going to pull me out of the fire, or in this situation it's like now she has to kind of not only fend for herself, but then now she has to lead other people. And so now it's like, okay, you have to take the combination of all the things that she's studied from Tech and the things that she's learned from Crosshair and Hunter and Wrecker, and like, okay, how do I, piece this together to fit me? And then she has her own talents, that we've started to see, and we uh alluded to what in season 2, I believe. So when she was playing that chess game with Sid, and we found out that she's really good at strategy, and
Right.
we're seeing that come into play now because now it is oftentimes where she's got to come up with a strategy of getting herself out of some stuff. And that's why Crosshair even kind of started to respect her because he's like, okay, well, I tried to get out of here and it didn't work, but Omega, you figured it out. You were patient enough, and so you start to see the growth in, like I said, in this character this season.
Well, and the other thing that I really like about this too, and this is really what they should have done. Well, I mean, we have had a couple of seasons, but this is my problem with Rey, is the fact that with Omega, all this stuff is organic growth. It makes sense, it has context, and, even though Omega is growing, it's all believable. None of it is just like her being overpowered or something.
Hmm.
This is sort of a natural evolution of her education, of her just growing up, of her being around all these other people that's rubbing off. And that's a perfect example because in a lot of and this is why I say the writing's been so good, because the sequel trilogy had very lazy writing in the sense of it didn't really establish a lot of character development. They just decided to get around that by overpowering the characters to a degree. I mean, not necessarily like the legacy
Hmm.
characters, but the newer ones. We didn't
Hmm.
really have time to see any of that development. I mean, probably the closest thing you had was maybe Poe, right? Because Poe had that Han
Yeah.
Solo trajectory going on where he had to learn to be a leader. And that
Hmm.
was developed over the entire trilogy.
Hmm.
Whereas something like Rey's power and her knowledge and all that stuff. And by the way, one of the show ideas that we've had is Screen Rant. I think it was Screen Rant. They did an article about why 10 reasons or something like that why Rey was not a Mary Sue, which, of course, I vehemently disagree with. So that should be a fun topic
Hmm.
to explore. But in that sense, they didn't do that with Omega, because even in this episode, she's obviously there. She's trying to figure out, how she's fitting into these new surroundings. She's looking things over and she sees the hopelessness that these kids have. And she's pretty much interacting, and trying to figure stuff out. And again, this is indicative of a more experienced and wiser Omega. But what I really love, and they've done this, and you brought up the crosshair connection, is that even though she has had a lot of growth, she still has a lot to learn. And they show that. They show some of the
Hmm.
mistakes that she makes. They show some of the, maybe some of the missteps, or maybe not everything that she does works. And that I
Hmm.
think is absolutely a key.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, um, once again, this is the proper way you want to show a strong female character.
Right.
You know, yet again, it's one of those things where she's strong. You see her independence. You see her ability to handle herself. She's not always quote unquote waiting to be rescued by or being the damsel in distress, but at the same time, she's not also like looked at as like, oh, well, I'm going to save all the men either. It's just and like you said, it's very organic, and I think um that's what makes it so enjoyable. And then when you see her interacting with the rest of the specimens, as they like to call them,
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
and even in that, once again, when you look at the empire, we were talking about that momentarily, but once again, it's just part of that demeaning part. Is like, okay, you're not even addressing me as a human being. I'm a specimen to you, or
Right.
I'm not a, well, you can't say necessarily a human being because some of them are aliens, but you know what I mean. Like, you're not addressing me as a living, breathing,
Yeah, like a sentient being. You're
a
addressing them
being.
more
Yeah,
as a,
it's like,
you are in a lab experiment, pretty much.
yeah, like you're a drop of blood on a, on a
Right, you're pretty
little.
much a blood farm. I mean, that's
Yeah,
really what it comes
exactly.
down to. It's just like, look, we don't need you. We need what you can give us, and that definitely is
Yeah.
something that's true. And it is a good point. They actually explore a lot of these deeper themes. Some of the themes you really have to watch and look
Hmm.
and read between the lines and that kind of thing, where they start to explore some of these things that we see. And by the way, that's the way that you can bring some of the current, maybe, evils of society or whatever, any of the
Yeah.
society's current issues. You can bring them in by proxy through these kinds of things because, again, they're timeless, right? Humans have
Yeah.
always been a little less than savory towards each other over the years. So you don't have to
Hmm.
get into the specificity of it, but you could bring in some of these deeper themes that you definitely have to look for. However, there's also a lot of themes that are more surface and are direct in this case. And that's
Yeah.
the way that you handle it. Not in the way that some of these other filmmakers have, where they're trying to cram agendas down everybody's throat and everything else. And again, I mean, you bring up a good point. This is how you write a Star Wars project.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, when you show her, when you show Omega, when she's getting her blood drawn, she swipes that little tool off the tray from Dr. Carr. She's paying attention to this whole little contraption in the wall that's basically, and she realizes, like, okay, well, you guys are taking my blood, and this, you know, contraption is basically sending my blood somewhere. Well, it has to go some. So where is it going?
Mm-hmm.
So which
Mm-hmm.
means that it leads to someplace else, which also, so you can see the rationale in Omega's head and what she's thinking. So then she, of course, involves the rest of the guys, like, well, and she's kind of calculated. You can see she's looking, observing. She's like, well, she's asking her questions, and I was like, oh, well, yeah, this is Jake, and he's broken out a couple of times, but you know, it didn't end well for him. He's like, well, I've broken out before. I've actually left. And they look at her like some sort of god, like almost like how the
Yeah,
Ewoks looked at 3PO.
exactly. Yeah.
They're like, wait, you left here? Like, how did, well, now see, if I was one of those kids, me, I'd be like, well, how did you get back in here though?
Well, and that's,
So
it's funny because I thought of that when she delivered line, when it was something to the effect of, well, I broke out of here once, I'm going to do it again. I'd be like, well, I don't want to be that guy, but, you say that you've escaped. Okay, that's great, but you're back here though. So
yeah,
I'm kind of wondering, but again, it does show though, and this is one of the things that I really liked. I like the fact that none of this was done in the typical cliche way, because this is one of those tried and true story tropes that they always use. About you have the one person who can break out, and he or she's going to take the other people with them. It's been
hmm,
done to death, honestly, but it has
sure,
been done in such a way, and this is something that's actually true to this whole series. They'll take a lot of these story threads that you've seen a million times, but they'll do it in a way that isn't cliche or maybe has like a different spin on it. And I think that that's one of those things that's really, really cool, especially in this case, because that could have been one of those rolling your eyes moments, like, oh, here we go, but it
Hmm.
wasn't. And I mean, I thought that that was really nice too.
Yeah, I mean, it's always, you do see the same story tropes because they work, and that's the thing. It's like,
Well, yeah.
it's kind of like what you, um, when I was a student of yours, and you were teaching me about editing, and I was like, well, how come we don't use all these type of wipes and dissolves and all this kind of stuff? Look, what do you see on TV? Cuts and dissolves. That's it. Like, you don't see all these funky little wipes and all these little circles. I mean, you see them maybe in some movies or something as a, like even in Star Wars, like you would see like the little circle reveal or something like that. But by and large, there's a standard, and there's like, okay, you see cuts and dissolves, and that's pretty much it. And I think when you're doing a story, when you're telling stories, like, you have to go with what. Why can't I talk to that? You have to go with what works. And I think that's the thing. It's like, certain things, and you can modify them slightly to, like you said, Eric, to put a different spin on things. But essentially, it's that we've all seen the same stories millions of times. It's just told in different ways. It's no different when we take standardized tests to ask you the same question like 80 different ways, but essentially it's the same question. But and
Right.
it's really just kind of just focus your mind. It's like, okay, you know what? We all end up in these types of situations, but there's always something new that you can bring out of something. And that's the joy of going to the movies, to see and that's the creative part. How can I creatively take something that's already been done and change it just a
Well,
little bit?
and I mean, a lot of times, look, these, what we call tried and true things, they're tried and true for a reason. I mean,
Hmm.
they work,
They
they're
work all
good
the time.
devices to use. I mean, it's also, you can tell some of these television shows or movies or whatever that try a little bit too hard. Like, they're trying
Yeah,
to be out of the box thinking or
exactly.
creative, just for the sake of being it too. And that's
And
another
that's the
thing.
problem. That is the biggest problem. And that's not just with, not to get on my soapbox here, but that's not that's one of the things I hate about society as a whole, is that, like, everyone's trying to be so innovative
Yeah.
to the point where it's like, okay, it ends up being stupid.
And it
And
doesn't work.
it doesn't work, and it just one of the big things I've always brought up, and Eric, this, is that with names, when people try to come up with all these funky different spellings for like basic names, and it's just like, why do you have to do that? Just, well, I want my child to be different. Well, by proxy, just the fact that your DNA is mixed with this person's DNA is going to make them different. Like, if if the way their name is spelled is all that's going to make them different, you did
Right.
a horrible job as a
Yeah.
parent.
And
You see what
that's
I'm saying?
yeah,
And
that's basically it. It's that whole thing of everybody gets a trophy, every child is special. Like, well, you know what? Not everybody is special. Average is there for a reason.
yeah,
Average,
someone has to
somebody
be
has to
average.
just be the average run of the mill, you
Yep,
know. And it's funny because a lot of times nobody wants to be that guy, but then at the same time, sometimes that is the desirable thing a
yep.
lot of times. Because, first of all, if everybody were unique and different, then nobody would really stand out. Number one. Number two,
Mhm.
it's no different than the whole thing. You have to have everybody wants to be a leader, nobody wants to be a follower.
Right.
And, that's a dangerous thing because things are going to fail if you don't have any followers. It's a
Yeah,
symbiotic type of system. So, in storytelling, it's very much the same way.
absolutely.
You're just it's not just because I think a lot of times what happens is people try to use these what we call tried and true story tropes, and they try to you know tell them in different ways or whatever. Sometimes you don't have to necessarily be super creative with it. Sometimes it's just putting it in a different context is what works.
Sure, absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it's just little nudges of growth, leads to other things. And I think that's But everybody wants the grand slam. No one wants to just, okay, let me just get to first base.
Right.
Everybody wants to knock something out of the park, and it's just like
Exactly.
sometimes you just need to get on base.
Sometimes, yeah.
And
Well, that's
and that,
exactly. Oh man, that's a great example, right? Everybody wants the home run. It's like, no,
mhm.
a lot of the stuff is, games are won by base runs, not necessarily, the grand slam home runs all the time.
Exactly. Me being, and I'm surprised I used a baseball reference instead of a
I
football
know.
one, but
Well,
it's
it's,
the same.
you
The
know,
same goes for football. I mean, that's why I say it's a game of
yep,
inches. It's like, okay, just get the next first down. Quit
yep,
trying to go for the
yep. Man, I
big
can't
long
count the number
touchdown
of
pass.
times
Yeah.
I have yelled that at the television, you know,
Haven't we all?
over football seasons. It's like, look, just try to stop, I mean, whether you're running or passing, it doesn't matter. It's just like, go for the next first down, man. You'll get there. You'll get down the field eventually.
Yeah.
Mistakes are made when you try to do too much too fast.
Exactly.
And,
Exactly.
another thing, even though this is based on source material as well, there's like a series on Netflix called Three Body Problems that I just finished. Literally, maybe, I don't know, like an hour before we went on today. It's an 8-episode thing. And it's kind of an alien invasion thing, but it's done way different from anything else that's out there. And there's a lot of really cool things in there. Like, the person that ends up, they're sending radio signals out and they get an answer back. And the answer is like, listen, you know, I'm a pacifist in our society and I don't agree with a lot of things. Do not answer this. We will come and destroy you. Don't answer this response.
hmm
And you don't usually see that in these type of movies. That's
Yeah.
one difference. And then of course the other difference is when they do find out about them. I'm not going to give everything away, but it's kind of like, okay, well, we're going to come, but it's going to take us like 400 years to get there. And so now you have to deal with, and it's done by the same guys that did Game of Thrones. It was Benioff and Weiss. This is like their first
Nice.
Netflix project. And it's incredible. It's
Well,
incredible because, once again, it is ultimately, now granted, it was based on it was either a novel or a graphic novel or something by this Chinese author, but it's done in just this amazing way. And like I said, it's only 8 episodes. It's pretty easy to get through. I would really highly recommend that to anybody watching this. It's just a phenomenal character-driven series, and it brings up a lot of things, but it goes into what we're talking about because, again, it's something that, if you just hear a little bit about it, you might go, "Ah, it's been done to death," but it's never been done this way before. And there's always
yeah.
different ways of doing things.
And that's what I loved about the Bad Batch because essentially, like when we first started, I didn't think we needed this. I was like, oh, we need,
Right.
but it's like, lo and behold, they found once again a creative, interesting way to tell a story that we already know, but from a different perspective. And we're getting to see, like, oh, this is how the Empire started doing this. And oh, this is what was going on. And wow, okay, like this is how stormtroopers came into the whole thing away from clone troopers. We bring that up a lot. And it's just really has been a compelling series all along, as we're following this whole Clone Force 99. But in this particular episode, we're seeing things like Omega kind of like figures out a way to crack into that thing, and it's like I said, this reminds me of so much of Andor. It
Yeah,
kind of
there's a
reminds
lot of
me of
Andor vibes.
Andor, and a little bit of oh, what's the crazy movie that everybody was watching on Netflix just like last year? Um,
Yeah,
when
talking about
everybody was
Squid Game, are you?
Squid Game, yes. It kind of had
I
a
was gonna
weird
say, there's a
Squid
little
Game.
bit, I could see that.
Yeah, like
Maybe a
almost like a
season
weird.
2 of that, by the way.
Yeah, I know. But you know how you had like when she looked up and she saw like the ring around the that little room that they were in, she was like, okay, they're constantly watching. Kind of reminded me of those guys when they had the little PlayStation, the X and O and triangle. Like they're
Mhm.
always just watching everybody. Like it just kind of had that Squid Game vibe to it. Um, I really enjoyed um some of the things that Omega did, like when she made it seem like she was playing with the puzzle, but she was basically making the layout of where
Yeah,
they
that
were,
was
and she
pretty
was like, "Okay."
cool.
That was I really enjoyed that. I was like, "Okay, Omega, like, kudos to you." Because that was very clever, and she knew, like, "Okay, they're expecting us to act like kids, so I'm going to act like one." But secretly, like, "Okay, well, look, this is where we are. Here's the outside, here's the perimeter, I'm like, "Okay." And then she's like, "Well, I just need a distraction. I need you guys to stall them while I kinda crack open this thing and try to, figure out some stuff." And she's playing the long game. She's like, "All right, I'm seeing this, I'm just gathering intel." You could tell that's what Omega's really doing right now. She's just gathering intel, which she's done with the Bad Batch all the time. They always say, "Hey, we need to scout this first before we just run in here. And we need to, figure out the best possible way." So I'm really curious as to see what Omega's plan is, but then I'm also curious to see how the Bad Batch, when they actually do arrive, because now they're not just walking into any old regular stronghold. This is Tantus. So this is really going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, again, that's one of the things, and I always go back to the difference and the change in Ahsoka, where you have this. I think the best way to put it is probably a quiet confidence. That's what Omega has now, much like Ahsoka did in Rebels, where there's
Yes.
just a very. It's not, because there was a very big similarity between Ahsoka and Omega in the earlier seasons of their respective shows, where it was all about, not necessarily showing off or anything like that, but just
Mhm.
really big movements and in everything from the way that they fought to the way that they just handled problems to anything else. Now it's a little bit more streamlined. It's using the mind more than the body in that sense. I mean, there's just a
Mhm.
lot going on there. And I think in addition to Omega, because obviously, just to break it down a little bit, there's essentially only two storylines in this whole episode,
Yep.
right? You had the Omega side, which is really what we've been focused on up to this point, and then
Yep.
you have the rest of the guys in the Bad Batch who've captured
Yep.
Rampart, and now they're doing their thing. And of course, one of the main things that I loved about that storyline was the
Yes.
fact that through the whole thing, it was actually a lot lighter in tone than I expected. Like, Rampart's
It
actually a
was.
lot funnier.
Man,
You
it was
know?
hilarious. And it was funny, Eric, because I was just about to like segue to that, and you did a great job doing it. But man, and I was going to mention the tone difference. It's like, okay, you have this whole dark, grim monotony, or melancholy kind of vibe over where Omega and the rest of
Right.
the subjects are, but then you have like this kind of, like I said, kind of almost like comical. uh I don't know, kind of like a comical action, like action comedy type thing going on with Rampart and the rest of the Bad Batch. Because from the moment that they presented him with this whole imperial uniform that he's supposed to wear, he's like, "Well, I can't wear this." And I was a vice admiral. This is a captain's uniform. And he's like, "Well, you've been demoted." It's just like he's constantly getting irritated because everything keeps changing on him. So it's kind of reminds me of Lando and Empire. It's like this deals keep getting worse all the time because he's just trying to get out of there. He keeps getting roped back into, okay, well, now you got to do this, and now we got to go here. He's like, "Wait, I thought we were just, I
And
thought we were
in
just buddies."
another grand, and I've said this about multiple characters, it just goes to show you once again about the writing and the pacing and all that of this particular season. If they had Rampart being just this cantankerous part of the Bad Batch, I'd watch another whole show on that, to be honest. I
He
mean,
almost seems like he would have been their leader, like almost like a Charlie from Charlie's Angels, and like he's Charlie, but he's like, "Guys, you got to stop doing this stuff," and no, you can't, and they're like, "Screw it, we're gonna do it anyway," you know,
well,
that type of
everything
thing. Like when
from
they ignore the captain.
yeah, exactly, and that's the thing where they just, I mean, he protests and they just more or less do their own thing anyway. I mean, the one thing that I thought was, well, first of all, it's funny because when they introduced that particular storyline, the whole Bad Batch and Rampart thing, and they brought Echo back, which was nice to see Echo make an appearance.
Mhm.
I think that was Cloud City. Like, I think that's Bespin where they were.
When they after they stole the shuttle and they
When they first go from the Omega, because the Omega thing happens first, right? You had that whole
yeah.
opening scene like we talked about. But when they go to the Batch thing and they're basically waiting, is like they show what looks like Bespin, possibly even Cloud City that they're on, and that's of course when Echo lands, and they go, okay, well this is a shuttle we're gonna get or whatever, and that was the thing where they were talking about Rampart, and Rampart was like, I can hear you. I mean, that was like the first thing where I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, this guy, he's
Right,
gonna have
yeah.
a little bit of
Levity to him.
yeah, a little bit of levity to him, because I mean the thing is that there's
He's like, I'm
some
right here. I can hear you.
yeah, exactly. And that's what's funny, because you get that levity, but you also have a little touch of suspenseful
Yeah.
action in there, and then, but everything is engaging. And I mean, again, one of the things that I thought was cool was you always have the plot point. Again, we go into tried and true story tropes, but tell it in a way that's not cliche.
Mm-hmm.
They did that here, even on this part of the storyline, right? Because you had a situation where we're always used to the whole thing of, yes, we got to go in, we got to steal a shuttle, we got to go and go to this,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we even saw it with the whole Exegol thing, technically, right? That was probably one of the more
Right.
recent examples. But, I mean, how many times in as many different shows as you can think of, some variation of this? I mean, obviously, if it's not sci-fi, it's not going to be ships. It could be, like stealing a vehicle to get to a particular base or something. But what I thought was cool was they actually were like, no, with this, you have to have the Empire actually beams the coordinates directly to the ship as it's leaving.
Mm-hmm.
See, it's that little difference of plot point that you get that actually makes it interesting, and you go, oh, even though this is familiar, well, this is a little
There's
different,
a twist to it. Yes, a twist to it.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely love. I mean, I even love the whole, like, because the whole time they're wondering, okay, if we can trust Rampart, if he's going to give us up. And one of the funniest, and I thought this was like one of the funniest moments, is when they try to walk into that one area, and that one Imperial wouldn't let him, and then Rampart steps in, and he's like, should I have you brought up on article section, whatever,
Yeah,
whatever. And he's
right,
like, well,
exactly. He
no,
starts
sir.
like quoting the
They-
book and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, but then Rampart is like, man, I miss doing that. That was hilarious.
Yeah, that
He's like,
that was
because
pretty
he's
funny.
been locked up, and he's a vice. I was like, man, I forgot how much I missed that. So I thought that was awesome. But then, when they first get in there, and they're like, okay, dude, you guys have got we got so much time to get this stuff out of here and get this information. You guys got to kind of hurry it up. And then Wrecker, his whole thing was hilarious too, because that one guy's like, well, what's your number? And he's like, well, yeah, come on, I'll show
Yeah,
you.
let me show you.
Yeah, he walks in, he just knocks him out. But one of the things that I always miss, and this is in every, not just Star Wars, but like we talk about, like I said, the story tropes. It's in every movie that's kind of like this, or a show that's kind of like this. It's like, okay, we're going to go and we're going to infiltrate some base or infiltrate some place, but we can't go in looking like this. We have to we have to look like them. Why is it that the clothes always fit perfectly? Like, nothing needs to be tailored, nothing, and especially like when it's a military thing, because military folks, everything has to be precise. Like, this guy, you just happen to know his size, his exact measure, and find someone who has his exact measurements every time. I just think that the only time they didn't do that was when I think it was Rex, when he had to put on a stormtrooper's uniform, and he was like, yeah, this doesn't fit like clone armor. And he was like, he was too big for it, and he looked weird. But I mean, that's one of those things I've always wondered, like, okay, that's on a scale of unbelievability. It's just like, all right, really, you like you just have this guy's size down to a T that looks
No,
perfectly when they put
that's
it on.
yeah, and that's the thing, right? Because even if you have, say, something like the waist size, the inseam's going to be different, especially with shirts, especially those type of shirts. They're not wearing
Yeah,
like unisex t-shirts or something. I mean, that's kind of a yeah.
yeah. Well, even when we see like Taylor, I mean, not Taylor, but when we saw on Rebels, when you had um Ezra and Kanan, and they were always like impersonate like or a scout trooper or whatever. Now, okay, most of the troopers are usually roughly around the same size or height. That's kind of like a formula for them. So Kanan, I could see fitting the build of that, but Ezra was always like probably a few inches shorter. He's probably like
Mhm.
maybe 3 or 4 inches shorter. He's a kid, so but yet the scout trooper uniform always fit him.
Well, that's the thing. I
Unless I
mean,
could,
again, you have to, and I think that that's where the suspension of disbelief comes in. And
right,
that's one of those things where you understand as the consumer of these stories that certain allowances have to be made in order to further the story. You can't be too caught on the minutia of all these
right.
details. And I mean, a lot of times, and look, we're all aware of them. I mean, it's not like we're just, I mean, some people undoubtedly probably don't think of these things, but even if you do, you let it go because, and that's where we talk about the suspension of disbelief, right? Because there is a threshold that no reasonable person can continue the suspension of disbelief. Like, it's so egregious that you're just like, yeah, I can't let this go. But something like that, though, it's funny because, I mean, my dad was really big on stuff like that. Like, it would kill me, especially in these sci-fi movies, right? Where he'd be talking about, I don't know, like this is unrealistic. And I'm like, as opposed to what? This whole thing is like, you're talking wizards and all, like, what context are you, like, you're worried about maybe the flight pattern of a TIE fighter, but you're willing to, like, that bothers you, but all this other stuff, it's like, and I think the thing is that we know, look, they're making movies, not documentaries. So
Right.
in order to advance the story, you have to do that. The only time that something like that bothers me is, like, for instance, in the scene that you bring up in this episode, we don't
Mhm.
know how long they had been looking for that uniform.
True.
So I can hang with that. What I hate is when, like, I can even go to another version that will work for me is they actually take the time to look at somebody and go, all right, that's about right. Now, it would
Mhm.
be nice if they went the extra mile, more like what you said, to maybe not make it fit perfectly, like maybe just let it fit a little weird. That might
Mhm.
sell it a little bit more, but what I hate is when they just produce this stuff and it really just sticks out. You're just kind of going like,
Mhm.
"Oh, I can't." Like, really, guys, come on now. Put a little bit into that. But in the case of this episode, they produced it. We don't know how long they were looking for it. They might, it's reasonable to assume that maybe Rampart sizing is part of some record they could break into, or maybe they just measured them themselves. You got computers all over the place, right? I mean, it seems
Yeah.
like it should be easier to do that. In the world of Star Trek, of course, is our obligatory Star Trek reference. But in Star Trek, you got replicators, right? So, I mean, at least
Right.
now you could
Yeah.
be a little bit more believable there, too.
True.
So, as long as that kind of thing is happening, I'm okay with it. But it's when it gets to be too ridiculous to where your mind can no longer just blow past it. And that's different for everybody, by the way. I mean, I realize that some people's suspension of disbelief is is blocked a lot earlier than others.
Yeah.
But you just try to find the happy medium because, again, as trying to tell a story. I mean, what are you going to do? You can't. Are we going to actually blow like 10 minutes of Wrecker finding a uniform? I mean, there's
Right.
a point where you got to go, look, we got to move this along because, again,
Absolutely.
that's one of the things that we talked about with this thing the whole time, right? Is that the pacing has been perfect.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And then even the suspense, because the whole moment when when they finally, okay, they get the shuttle, but the thing is about to leave, and I was like, okay, we're waiting for Echo to deactivate this whole proximity thing, so they can actually like. I mean, the plan was solid. It's like, okay, well, we'll just attach ourselves to the shuttle, and then we'll just let the shuttle just take us there. But it's like, okay, now you're waiting on him to, turn off this proximity thing. You got people who are aware of like, okay, hey, something's up. So now you have this whole suspense. And it's like, okay, are they going to make it in time, or is it going to be like another situation with Crosshair when he missed putting the tracker on the thing? It's
Right.
like, we got to get there. And so, especially like we know is there's only 2 episodes left, so it's like, okay, do they miss it this time? And then on the second episode, they get there, and then we see what happens on the finale. Like, you kind of it did give you that sense of suspense, and I think they did that once again very well in this particular episode.
Well, this is hands down the most suspenseful, in my opinion. Anyway, it's the most suspenseful of all the episodes this season. Because if you look at each of the things, I mean, there was suspense in Omega.
Well, that one in the Pabu one when the attack on Pabu.
Yes,
that had a lot of suspense too.
But that one had a lot of action. There was a lot of suspense because you did feel trapped, like the clones were trapped. But this just seemed to have, but even with the Pabu one, it was really leading up to that one scene, and that one scene was where you got, once you had the breach and the infiltration of Pabu, then it got crazy. But in this one, it was just like, there were all these different levels. And I mean, speaking of the suspension of disbelief part, that was the thing that was a little trippy to me too, because it's like, okay, you neutralize the proximity sensors, but if you get this whole other ship that's attached to your ship, it just seems, unless it's like a Star Destroyer, see, that's where I think Lucas did a little bit better of a job. If the Falcon is attached to, like, say, a Star Destroyer, you can say, okay, they wouldn't even notice. If you got a little freighter, though, and you're attaching another whole ship to it, it should move or fly differently. It should, like, you should feel the weight of that thing, it should handle a bit differently. So even though the proximity sensors aren't necessarily, like, going off, you would think that they would have felt the difference in weight,
In theory, I no, I completely agree with you, because that's a very valid point. But I think what happens is that because, and granted, they dock ships to each other all the time, but yeah, and you probably do feel it. But I think because the moment they docked, they jumped. I think that's probably why they.
Well, and maybe that could be. But the other thing,
they had to time it perfectly too.
Right? No, that's true, and that was the thing, is that you got all that suspense, which once again, and we brought this up on, I think, an episode. It was either the last episode that we did or it was the one before, but we talked about how it's really fascinating to watch how they operate without tech, because Echo's like trying to get this done, but it's, and that if it was tech, he could have done it, like that, right?
Seconds.
But
right,
he's not there, so they gotta work with what they got. So I thought that was also something that was really interesting about this particular episode, is the fact that they're getting around all these different things, and I like the fact that it wasn't too easy. That things didn't necessarily go off at plan. I mean, even going back to the Crosshair thing, like you said, where he went to shoot that tracker and he missed. Well, nobody would have expected that. I mean, they never miss, right? So this is something that I thought was, I don't know, just something that I thought was really, really good in the way that they handle things, is that the hero doesn't always win, but yet the main objectives are being met. It took a little bit, and you were wondering, will they or won't they? But they did end up attaching to the ship at the last minute and flying off, and you didn't feel it was too easy, unlike, say, The Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it definitely was earned. I think that's the word David would probably use. It was earned moments that was like, okay, yes, we got there. Yes, you know, um, we accomplished the mission, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't just like, oh, we'll just walk in here and do this. It's like, no, you you really got to earn this victory here.
Yeah.
And I think from now on, I mean, even from the rest of the season, last 2 episodes, I think we're going to see more of that. It's just everything's going to have to be every little win is going to be like, okay. Once again, it's like watching that football game. It's that struggle for the first down. It's like, yeah, we got the first down, but it's not like we just bowled over everybody. It's like, no, it was we barely got there, but it's still a win. And I think that's why we watch football. That's why we watch that's why we want close games because you don't know. And but you're hoping, and that's what you want to instill in your fans as they're watching. You want to have them on the edge of like, okay, good. They made it to Papu, or they made it to Tantus. All right, now we got to get to Omega now. Okay, how are we going to do this? It's just progressive steps that it takes to get. It's the journey, and that's really what we're here for. Is the journey.
Well, and I mean that probably brings us into the what would we like to see next? Because I mean, if you think about it, we're getting down to the wire, which means obviously we always talk about what we want to see in the next episode. Sometimes we're talking about the next story arc, but now, even though I think it's going to be more relevant when we do it next week, because then we'll be one episode away. It'll be like the next episode will be the season/series finale. So there'll be more weight on it. But as far as knowing that there's only 2 more episodes left, I mean, speaking from my end, I mean, from the next episode, if we're just talking very localized here, I really want to see the continuation of Omega's escape from Tantus. Because again, you have these 2 converging points. On one hand, the Bad Batch, Clone Force 99, are on their way to save Omega. But Omega is also on her way to escaping.
Yep.
So it's kind of like, well, you have to figure who's going to be successful first, and at what point are they going to actually meet. And then... Or are they? And then you have to look at the fact of, let's just assume for the sake of argument that a rescue or escape is done and successful. Well, then what? It almost seems to me like the whole fate of Omega's escaping or not escaping or whatever would have to be resolved in the next episode. And then things start to get tied up in the episode after. Like maybe a bigger picture of Necromancer, or how this is all floating into the either, Rogue One or something like that. You know what I mean? Like kind of the bigger picture of it. But I mean, as far as what I would like to see next, obviously I would like to see some resolution of Omega's escape, or how she's going to do it, maybe how she employs the help of the other specimens or kids, And then, of course, look, I really want to see more interaction between Rampart and the clones. I'm really liking this. I kind of would. I would actually like to see him become a permanent addition to their team. Yep.
Right, almost like a business liaison.
Well, because I mean, a lot of the lines and stuff were hilarious. They had a really good interaction, and it's kind of like, look, they even pointed out, it's like, hey, don't forget, the Empire betrayed you. We're the ones that actually broke you out. So.
Yep.
You might want to consider maybe looking at us as your future and not necessarily getting back to the romantic past of being a vice admiral of the Empire.
Yeah, I mean, I think will be an interesting conundrum, and I don't think we've ever seen this before, would be if Omega breaks out and the Bad Batch lands and Omega sees him, like, hey, I think that's them, but she's already escaped into the jungle somewhere. Was like, okay, well, do you go back to them, or do you keep running and with the rest of the kids? And let's just say, like, okay, well, Omega gets away, but then the Bad Batch doesn't.
Kind of like, does she sacrifice them in order to get the kids out, type of a thing?
Yeah, exactly. And herself, because she knows she's the key to whatever it is that they're trying to do. But she would know, like, okay, me going back to help them would only put everything more at risk and at danger. It would be smarter for me because I think in Crosshair even says like, yeah, I wouldn't have come back for you. Like I would have kept
Right.
moving. And I think that's
Right.
one of those things that's like, well, although those are her brothers, it's like she realizes that she's a big part of whatever the Empire is doing. And if she gets caught again,
Yeah, she can't risk that. Exactly.
she can't
And
risk that.
that would also be a nice callback to Crosshair's comment.
Hmm.
You know, if it had been me, I wouldn't have come back for you. And now Omega going, well, it is me, and I'm not going to go back for them because it would be too big of a risk. I mean, look, we don't know. From a storytelling perspective, it would be great if Asajj Ventress made that one appearance and she sort of fulfilled her purpose and then moved on. But then there's that other
Hmm.
part of you that goes, well, you can always call her and, maybe effect a rescue that way.
Yeah.
And you can maybe debate for hours, at least we could, I know, on which would be the better choice from a story perspective. But definitely from a fanboy, wanting to see some action or whatever, that would probably be another way that you could bring it in. And look, if you wrote it correctly, you could actually do it in a way that honors the storyline too, that it's not, again, another cliche thing, because they've been really good at taking certain cliched plot lines, story tropes, however you want to put it, and making it in such a way that it not only serves the current story, but you don't necessarily feel like it's cliche. And I think that
Yeah.
that's something that honestly is more difficult in some cases. And like you said, well, actually, Ted said it earlier, but we only have 2 more episodes. And so when we review, the second to last, episode 14 next week, well, obviously when we do this whole, hey, what do you want to see next? Well, now we're talking about the season/series finale. And there's not a whole lot that we can see next. And it would be one thing if this thing were just wrapping up the season, but it's actually wrapping up the series. So it seems to me like they almost have to wrap up this storyline that they've been doing in this next episode, in episode 14, and then take 15 and maybe start to wrap up some loose ends of the series.
I also want to know if we're going to hear any more information about necromancer. Like, what is it really for?
Mm-hmm.
Because we kind of know like it's the Emperor's Pet Project. We know it's dealing with blood and M count, and we kind of have an idea, but we still don't know completely like what his full on. It hasn't. We suspect we know what it is, but it hasn't been definitively laid out yet. That's what I'm going with.
Well, but I
So
mean,
I wonder if they're gonna. I wonder if they're gonna bring that up in
they might.
the next
Or,
episode.
I mean, another strong possibility is they might have been laying the groundwork so it's picked up again in Ahsoka or The Mandalorian.
Yeah,
Because that's
true.
really where, because if you think about it, Grogu, his whole deal is very similar to Omega's. It's almost like Omega
Mhm.
didn't work out. Maybe she escapes, maybe she dies, we don't know. And now they got their eyes on Grogu, so it's like, ooh, well, get him now. It's
Mhm.
almost like a continuation or a substitute. So
Yeah.
it might be that what they were doing was using this Bad Batch storyline and laying the groundwork and a little bit of prequelizing, if you will. So that way they can now go back to a season 2 of Ahsoka, a possible season 4 of The Mandalorian, or even the Mandalorian Grogu movie. And maybe now that's where you pick up on this. Hey, you remember that necromancer thing? Well, now we're going to
Mhm.
actually tell you what it is and what it's going to do.
Right.
Because honestly, I think that that's sort of as quiet as it's kept. I think because of the way the sequel trilogy played out, they're doing a little bit of damage control. They're going back and they're trying to fill in some gaps and lay some
Mhm.
groundwork and maybe introducing some concepts that will make the sequel trilogy make more sense.
Yeah. I agree. I agree 100%.
Yeah, so we'll have to see. All right, well, Monday, I mean, we've got a couple of things that we could do on Monday. I don't know what we're going to actually do. I mean, I say that like it's not tomorrow. But, we should be, I always say that, we should be live tomorrow. And everything should be, normal. So you guys are going to want to check that out. Daryl and I, of course, will talk today. And you'll see, just keep your eye out for the next upcoming live event. You'll see it. You can check us out tomorrow at 8. I am going to put that poll up about Rebel Moon, whether you guys want us to review the second one or not. If you do, great, we'll do it. If not, okay, we'll put it to bed. It was a Star Wars project, but now it's not, so whatever. And, yeah, as usual, keep supporting the channel. We'd really appreciate you guys. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already had a chance to do so, because, again, I don't have to tell you guys watch YouTube all the time. You know that it helps channels like us. We're smaller channels, although we are getting more subscribers. We're not getting as much watch time, so if you guys do want to go back and actually check out some stuff, I mean, I think most of our stuff is interesting. Go ahead, have it, even if you have it on in the background, it's fine. Just, I don't know, listen to it while you're working around the house or something. So I think with that, we'll wrap up this episode. Again, we only have 2 more episodes of The Bad Batch to go, and that should take us right into Tales of the Empire. So as soon as The Bad Batch is wrapped up, the Friday shows will then be dedicated to reviewing Tales of the Empire. And even though it's all going to drop at once, we'll still do one a week. All right, so with that, we'll see you guys Monday night at 8, theoretically. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.